today we're going to start with a little bit of theory and then move on to some interesting reality. The theory we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the economies of scope. Now, we talked about economies of scale a couple lectures ago, and the notion of what happens if you double production or halve production, etc. Economies of scope are different. Economies of scope aren't about whether you make your firm bigger or smaller. It's about the economies that arrive from combining different kinds of production. So scope is the scope of what you produce. An economy of scope is when if you produce two goods, how does it compare to the efficiency of just producing one good? Okay? And to do this, we're going to introduce a concept we call the production possibilities frontier. To discuss this, the production possibilities frontier. It's a new concept we're going to introduce. And the production possibilities frontier shows the maximum combination of outputs that can be produced for any combination of inputs. So max outputs given inputs. Okay? And we can see a production possibility frontier on in figure 9.7a. Okay? So basically, think about yourself as a firm. And your whole life is this class. Okay? And you're the firm. And what you're producing is the best possible grade in this class. But in doing so, there's two different things that you can spend your time on. You can spend your time on problem sets or in studying for exams. Okay? And think about your trade-off in evaluating those two different things you can spend your time on. So for example, let's say that if you spent all your time on exams, on studying for exams, you could get 200 points on exams. But you get 0 on problem sets because you spend no time on problem sets. Likewise, imagine if you spend all your time on problem sets but didn't study for exams, you get 200 points, which is all your problem set points. This is just not true in this course. Let's just assume that's a scoring system. The question is, what happens if you mix your time? Now, in the first graph here, we have a linear production possibility frontier. What this says is it doesn't matter where you spend your time. A minute spent on problem sets is equally productive to a minute spent on exam studying. So you can choose any combination of exam studying and problem sets you want. As long as you use your time the most efficiently, you'll always get 200 points. And it's really sort of, you can be indifferent on where you spend your time. But an alternative would be a situation where doing problem sets makes it easier to study for exams, or vice versa. That's what we call a situation of an economy of scope. Economy of scope. An economy of scope is where doing one thing raises your productivity in the other. Yeah?
So is a good analog to this, like horizontal versus vertical integration?
Not really, because both of them, you're saying scale versus scope?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could think about that. I mean, you could think of horizontal integration just growing and vertical integration merging with other kinds of firms. But you can also horizontally integrate in terms of scope as well. So it's not quite as clear. But that's the basic idea. Scale is just about getting bigger, doing what you do and getting bigger. Scope is about mixing different things you do. And that could deliver an economy of scope if doing one thing makes you more productive in the other thing, as is likely to be the case with problem sets and exams. The more you study for an exam, the probably better you do in a problem set. The more time you spend in a problem set, the better you do in an exam. So an economies of scope is going to lead to an outward bending production possibility frontier, where you're better off working both on problem sets and exams than doing just one or the other. So you just problem sets or just exams, you get 200 points, but if you do some of each, you'd get more. And that's what we call an economy of scope. Okay? Then in the business school world, they call that a synergy. Ooh, fancy word. But we know it's just an economy of scope. Okay, and the economy of scope is whenever producing goods jointly is less expensive than producing them separately. Or technically, where the cost of producing just Q2 plus the cost of producing just Q1 So this is a cost function of Q1 and Q2. In the first case, you produce just Q2. Second case, just Q1 is greater than the cost of producing some quantity Q1, Q2. Okay? That would be a cost function which would indicate economies of scope. We're producing none of Q1 and Q2 and some Q2, and producing none of Q2 and some Q1 costs more than producing the same amount together. That would be an economy of scope, okay, or synergy. Now, that's not the only possibility. You could also have a diseconomy of scope. That's in figure 9.7b. That's if this was less. If producing each independently was more efficient than producing them together. You have diseconomy of scope. The example here that I like to think of is when I was here at MIT, I was on the tennis team. And I'd never heard of squash, and someone just wanted to try squash. And I thought, well, that's good. When the tennis team's off season, I'll play squash. That will make my tennis game better, and I play tennis, will make my squash game better. But it turned out that doesn't work. Because in tennis, you don't want to use your wrist, and squash is all wrist. So I messed up my tennis game by playing squash. And by playing tennis, I messed up my squash game. It was actually a diseconomy of scope. I was better off just playing one or the other and not trying to play both. Okay? That's a diseconomy of scope. So basically, the bottom line is you could think of this as when you do two things at once, does it make each more productive, or does it make each less productive? Okay? And that would, if it's less productive, that would be diseconomy of scope. Okay? And basically, you know, we mentioned the term vertical integration. The basic idea is asking if you're a firm and there's another firm that does something different than you, are you both going to benefit from your buying that other firm and combining, or are you actually going to make things worse? That's where it comes up. Okay? Now, in theory, if you're a well, let me stop there. Questions about this concept?